What do you do when you want to play some of your favorite TTRPGs, but you're unable to get a group together? What if I told you all it would take is another rule kit that you can just add in order to play that game solo? Well, we're going to talk about that right now. This is the Mythic Game Master Emulator 2nd Edition.
Every day, dice roll, quick adventure calls, walking through tabletops, golden halls. Masters of pen and paper, RPGs of every flavor, talking about different creators. The choice of games is never greater. Come with us to games they run through, new, old, and interesting.
Welcome into the show, everybody. My name is Mike. I'm going to be your host for the show tonight. Our main man, Finney, the co-host of this show, is unfortunately unavailable to join us tonight, so it's just going to be me. We're going to give this a try, and hopefully by the end of this, you haven't turned it off, but I'd like to talk to you all about the Mythic Game Master Emulator 2nd Edition. This system is one that allows you to play any tabletop RPG that you enjoy, any of the ones that are in your interest. It doesn't have to be a solo game. It'll allow you to play that game solo. The other thing that it can do is it can assist you as the GM. So even if you do have a table full of people, it will allow you to actually build the game out the way that you want to, using this tool system to help bolster that up. It's a really, really cool system, and I really can't wait to talk to you about it. The game is made by a company called Wordmill Games, and it's created by one Tana Pigeon, who is essentially the creator and the publisher of this game. And the Mythic itself is one of the earliest solo RPGs out there. It's definitely one of the most well-known ones. It was created in 2003 as kind of like a universal RPG, and then it utilized something inside called an oracle, which is essentially a way of GMing it for yourself. We'll get into that a little bit later, but the thing to take away from this is that over the years, Mythic has kind of seen these revisions and these upgrades, and it's now this kind of wide variety of products itself. From the game Mythic, the TTRPG, which is something that when Finney returns, we'll be doing that in a later episode, to this game emulator, Game Master Emulator, which is one that we're talking about today. There's also mobile apps, additional resources on the website. They put out a periodical magazine. I think they publish it every month, which gives new ideas and details for adventures and things. Think the old Dungeon and Dragons magazine. It would be kind of like that, right? How good it would be to have those magazines again. Even though they're digital versions, it's very cool that they're releasing these periodicals. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this solo TTRPG emulator system that they've got here, one is because, well, Finney's not here, so what better way to test the solo TTRPG system out than literally do the podcast solo? But also, every GM needs this tool in their repertoire, right? I just mentioned it, but these tools aren't just dedicated to solo play, right? Sometimes it's nice to be able to have something you can rely on in order just to push the game forward when you're creating a lot of these things as a GM. And so for $15 for the PDF copy, you really get a lot of bang for your buck here, right? They also sell soft and hardcover copies of the book. So if you're somebody that likes that texture in your hands of an actual book, you can also buy that from them too. I'll put all the links in the description below, as we always do. The illustrator for the game is one Jorge Munoz. I apologize. I know I got that wrong. But the line editor for the book as well is Mel Jakes. And so the three of them make up Wordmill Games, which essentially publishes, creates this system in the mythic world of things, which is it's super cool. There's a lot going on in this system as well as the game itself. And with that out of the way, I think we need to dive into this book and let's get into the nuts and bolts of the system itself, because I kind of want to talk to you about what makes this so special, right? So as mentioned earlier before, this is a tool that allows you to use any tabletop RPG either by yourself or without a GM. So you could play at a table with other players without a GM and then use this as the GM. And then there's also an option to use this as a co-GM as well, essentially a partner in crime as you build through. So it's a tool, right? The way that we wield it is the correct way that it's used. That's essentially the name of the game with this book. And it says it multiple times throughout the book as well, that they want you to pick and choose and take what you want out of this to use it to your best advantage and make the game the best it can be while still utilizing the powerful tools that are here as well. And so this is essentially going to structure and guide scenes of a gaming session that's going to allow everybody at the table to remain on their toes and surprised. We don't have a GM, so we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get all of that information to us without spoiling the story as we go along the way. So there's a lot of heavy lifting there, but the beauty with the system is there is chaos and random events, etc., that we're going to get into a little bit here that push the game forward and get you thinking, get everyone around the table's imaginations flowing and thinking about how we're going to do things. By the way, I did mention it before, but this is the second edition of this emulator, and Tana writes that she's rewritten the text in order to make it more approachable to new players, while still maintaining what it had for the experienced players. There's a rundown of all of the things that have changed in the second edition of the book at the beginning of it, in the first chapter. So do be wary of the changes that they have made. If you're running the first edition of this and you're coming into the second, there is a fair amount of changes, so I would recommend that you take a quick look there. So the way that this works is that there's a few things that kind of play together in order to make the whole Mythic Game Master Emulator function alongside any TTRPG. And this is outlined on page 7 if you've been following along. We'll get into the nitty-gritty after it, but essentially the way that this works is we're going to ask a yes or no question and get an answer for it. There's going to be random events that will add surprises along the way. There's meaning tables that offer inspirational prompts for important details. That's how we're going to flesh out a lot of things. There's lists that track important goals and characters, which are randomly selected when called for. There's a scene structure to give the adventure form and order. And then there's a chaos factor that changes the tempo of the adventure as you play it. So things get more intense. They might back off a little bit. It just depends on the decisions that you make. Whew. Okay, so starting at the top. The first and most important thing, the heart and soul of a mythic adventure, is something called fate questions. And essentially, these are questions that can be answered with yes or no, and they should be based on what you want your character to experience. So these are the intended, essentially, to guide the narrative of the adventure. These are not intended to tell you what you're going to do. These are things where you're going to say, I would like to do this, can I? And it's going to then determine the pathing for that. So that kind of breaks down into a bunch of different things that we're going to dive into here shortly. But once we ask that question, then we determine the odds of that answer being yes. We consult a chart on page 19 that converts that into a percentile chance, and then you would roll a 1d100. The roll will now determine if it is yes, no, or exceptional yes or no. Essentially, the answer is yes, the answer is no, or it's very yes or very no, right? It's also stated that essentially the way to think about this, anything that you would ask your GM in a social RPG, that would be a fair game for a fate question. So for example, is the door locked? Is it raining outside? Etc., right? Those kinds of things that we need the GM to fill that information out for us, the players. Those would be the things that we'd be talking about regarding fate questions. So just for example purposes, let's say that you're traveling down a road that's been known to have groups attacked by bandits. So you would ask, when we travel this road, are we going to be attacked by bandits? And then you would go through the process. So there is a fate chart that is on page 19 of this book. And on the y-axis, we can see that the odds go all the way from certain down to impossible, all the different variations of the odds. On the x-axis is the chaos factor, which is essentially a marker of how the game is performing, whether we are hurtling towards chaos or we're coming back into order, essentially. And so we would use that chaos factor to find the intersecting point of the odds, right? And we always start, the chaos factor always starts in a game at 5. We'll get into that in just a short moment here, but in this case, let's say that it's early on. So the chaos factor is set to 5. We see, and we're going to say that it's 50-50. There's a chance we might get attacked on this road. So we see the intersecting number there for 50-50, chaos factor 5, has a large 50. The center number is 50. And then a small 10 to the left and a small 91 to the right. So that means that if we roll above a 50, then the answer is no. No, you do not get attacked. And if we roll a 91 or above, it's exceptionally no. So it might be not only are you not attacked, but there's a helpful person on the road that's going to help guard you. Maybe there's a guard patrol that's coming through that's going to ensure that we get a good night's sleep tonight. Inversely, on the other side of it, if we were to roll equal to or less than 50, then that would be yes, you are attacked. Or if we roll a 10 or less, it is an exceptional yes. So not only are you attacked, but now they're joined by additional people that we weren't expecting, right? So what we would do then is we take our dice, we take a 2d10 and we would roll it. Essentially, D100 essentially what we're talking about here. But let's say, for example, I'm going to actually roll the dice here. So I rolled a 51, which means that no, we do not get attacked today. So that's essentially the way that this works. And as you would ask these questions, you would consult this chart, you would roll. The chaos factor is going to be changing as we play through the game. The odds of whatever it is that we're doing are going to change. And so all of those different answers are going to dictate where we land on this chart. So very simple. I like that mechanic. It's a really cool way to push the story forward, and as well as introduce a little bit of randomness to it as well with the exceptional yes, exceptional no. So we were talking about the chaos factor, which is tracked throughout the game. And essentially what that is that impacts the likelihood of rolling yes on the fate chart, but it also determines the frequency of random events taking place and how often scenes begin as expected. I mentioned that the chaos factor starts at 5 on a kind of standard run-of-the-mill thing. And then depending on how that scene takes place, it's going to increase or decrease, depending on all the things that are happening during your scene. It cannot reduce below 1 or above 9. So you're always within that. Anything that falls outside of that, if you're at 1 and it goes down again, it just stays at 1. We ignore that result. We'll dive a little bit deeper into the concept of all of that, the random events and all of that later, but the long and short of it is essentially this is a changing number as we go through our game, and it's constantly going to be shifting and moving around and impacting all of the decisions and changes as we go forward, which is really cool. The book lists alternatives for the chart in the form of fate checks instead of using a fate chart, where you would take 2d10, add them together, and then you consult a completely different chart. There's different ways you can do that, and that's how this book is laid out. It wants to give you options, what works, what doesn't work, take this, don't take that, etc. And mostly the concept is that you do this. This is your game. You use it the way that you want to, essentially. Page 27 is identifying when you should and shouldn't be asking fate questions. And that mostly boils down to whether or not you're sure an expectation you have is true. So for example, is the door barred on the other side? Well, that's not something that you would know, but if you're in a space where it makes sense that that door is barred, then that would be something you'd consult the fate chart for. Because while there's a chance that it is barred, maybe there's a greater chance that it is not barred, in which case then you would look at unlikely, very unlikely, maybe even nearly impossible, who knows, right? Depending on the scenario that you're currently dealing with would then depend on all of those. And you take a little bit of liberties and decisions. And if you're working as a group, then you would come to a consensus before you make that decision. But on the whole, essentially, you would make that decision from the odds, you would roll the dice, and then you would move on with your game accordingly. It also recommends that you keep the fate questions limited to 2 or less for any one detail, because the game works best with the less that you use the fate chart. If you leave everything up to fate, you're going to have some really crazy stuff happening, because the likelihood of you rolling good or bad or changing the way that things are within your game due to the fate chart are going to cause potential bad things to happen, or maybe two good things to happen. And so it recommends to use it sparingly, right? You would want to make sure that you're not pushing the envelope too much. And as a solo player, in my opinion, the way that I would probably run this is I would ask one question and then it would move on from there. Essentially, the decision's made, we're moving on. No different than when you're sitting at a table and everybody around the table's asking the GM for perception checks. No, you make one perception check and then we're moving on. Next, after the fate questions, we move into random events. And so the random events are required because while your adventures are being guided by the questions and the expectations we just went through with the fate questions, there has to be things that come out of the blue in order to spice things up. Random events can occur at 2 points during an adventure: whenever a fate question is asked and when a scene is first generated. And we're going to get into scenes here real shortly. Essentially, the way that this works is whenever you would ask a fate question, there's always a chance of a random event occurring. And this happens when you roll double digits on your D100 check, where the 1 die, so for example, the 2 in 22 or the 3 in 33, is equal to or less than the chaos factor, then a random event will occur. So if the chaos factor is 5 and we roll a 44, well, now we're now going to trigger a random event because 4 is less than 5. And then if this happens, we now need to figure out what the random event is. And the book breaks it down into essentially 4 parts: considering the context, determining the event focus, determining the event meaning, and then interpreting the results. The context is pretty straightforward. I mean, everything that's happened up to this point is within context, right? If we use our bandit road again and a random event takes place, then maybe it's not the bandits that attack, but instead something more terrifying is coming through. But it needs to be within the confines of the adventure that we've just laid out. So it needs to still make sense, right? If we're going down the bandit road and all of a sudden a spaceship comes in, well, I mean, that's outside of the confines of our adventure at this point. So do keep that in mind. While it's random, it's not random, too high. Once we've done that, we're going to consult the random event focus table with a D100 to kind of help aim where that takes place. So this would be things like a new NPC, actions, something remote is going to take place. This is essentially going to aim where that random event is taking place, or it's going to focus it in essentially on what is actually happening. Then there's an adventures lists table that can be filled out on page 45 to help in scenarios like this to mark off characters or threads that are currently in play in the adventure. And you're going to want to make sure that you've got this filled out in advance. We'll get to this a little bit later in the episode, but filling out this table is going to be a huge benefit for you in the long term because it's going to prevent you from stopping at this point where you have to really think about like, well, hang on a second, where is this person? What does John Roberts do in regard to this? And it's going to help you kind of keep track of things a little bit. So I would recommend filling that out before we get started. After that, we're going to consult the tables starting on page 47, and this is going to help hone in on the meaning of the results. And so there's 3 varieties of those results. There's actions, descriptions, and elements. And these are tables that exist within this area. We're going to roll 1d100 twice on the table, which will give us 2 words. We'll then pair them together and use their combined meaning to suggest interpretations for your event. And anybody that is listening to the podcast Tale of the Manticore, he is currently using this system in season 3. And I would highly recommend the podcast above all. It is an absolutely phenomenal D&D based podcast, but you can actually hear the system in action while they do that. Is mythic meaning that he has, and he works that into the system essentially to help guide basically stuff that's going to take place. And that's where this essentially comes from. We're going to take those 2 words, slap them together, and we're going to come out with something that's going to help guide the answers. So for example, if we're looking at descriptions, maybe we have a town that we're coming up against, and the town, we would roll the 2d100. So we roll once and we get 56, and we roll again and we get 78. Well, 56 is lively, 78 is quaint. So you have a lively, quaint town. Maybe you work that out, that there is a lively town with a quaint little inner area, and you kind of massage it from there. It helps you essentially drive to a point that you might not otherwise be thinking. If it doesn't make sense, roll again. Just roll the dice again. Or, you know what? If you have to, pick something else off this list. The intention here isn't to hold you to the tables. It's more to give you tools in your repertoire in order to drive the story forward. So this is very, very powerful and incredibly powerful outside of the confines of even using it here. Implementing just this table system into your TTRPGs would be massively helpful in all ways. So then we take all of this, we roll it together into the interpretation of the event, and then the system gives us the foundation, but now it's up to us to fill out the space, so to speak, right? So maybe our random event has us meeting a new NPC, so we decide to use the description table number 2, we roll boring and old, and now we have the description of our new NPC, in which we create the story for our old boring NPC that we just got introduced to the context of our story. So old boring John, and then we start saying what old boring John does in regards to our story, whether he gives you a quest, or maybe he's the quest receiver. Maybe he's the person you're delivering some bad news to. Maybe he's the mayor of this town. However it fits within the context of the story that you're running through and the game that you're playing, that's how you would essentially use this. Okay, so now we've got systems in place to handle the various bits and pieces that come up during the game through the fate questions and the random events. But what about setting the stage for the game itself, right? Because that's typically the GM's job. They would build the adventure to set things up for the players to play in the world. But since we don't have a GM, or we're using this to assist us, the GM, maybe we don't have any ideas, we need some help with this, we're then going to utilize this emulator for this purpose, right? And that's where scenes come in, because the scenes essentially act as a framework for all of those questions and random events to slot into. And scenes break down basically into the following elements, right? There's lists, which are a collection of adventure goals to pursue and characters to interact with. We referenced the adventures list just shortly before this. That's the one on page 45, right? You're going to want to have this filled out as best that you can before you get started, because there's going to be points where you're going to need to pull these names or goals forward. There's a scene structure, and that's essentially the way that you would determine the start and finish to your scene. And then past the first scene, our intro scene, there's typically 3 different kinds of scenes. One would be the expected scene. That's literally the expected next step of our adventure. We were walking through the woods to get to the house, and we arrived at the house, and then this happened. There's the altered scene, which is as if it was in another dimension, right? Where one small change took place, right? So we were walking through the woods to get to our house, and we got stopped by the authorities on the road, right? It's changed. It's still the same, but it's changed just slightly. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be like tiny. It can be something completely different. You're in charge to make sure that it makes sense. But again, I would recommend keeping it in check a little bit, because number 3, the third type of scene, is an interrupt scene. And while the expected and altered scenes mostly play within the confines of the expectations of the scene itself, interrupts are when anything can happen. And essentially in this case, what you would do is you would generate a new scene the same way that you would generate a random event that we had before with the tables, with the D100, and you roll the 2 dice, right? You'd roll for the event focus and the meaning from the tables in this section, and then you would interpret what that means into the new story path, allowing for fresh and surprising story elements. So this is where you can now have a complete 90-degree turn on your story, where all of a sudden you were going to this house in the woods and something happened. There's, trees and forestry blocking the road. We can't get there anymore. So now we have to go into town. Something completely different. And so when moving from one scene to the next, it needs to be tested. And in this case, what we would be doing is we would be making a check by rolling a D10 and comparing it to the chaos factor value. If we roll above the chaos factor, which starts at 5, so let's use 5 as an example, rolling above that means that the scene goes as expected, and then equal or less means that it's going to change somehow, with the odd numbers being an altered scene and even numbers being an interrupt scene. So that's where things start to change. So we make the check at the end of the scene, we make a check with a D10. We compare it to the chaos factor. If it's an odd number, we're going to have an altered scene. If it's an even number, we're going to have an interrupt scene. Or if it is above the chaos factor, we're good. So this makes sense because the higher the chaos factor, the more likely you're going to have story changes in the form of both altered and interrupt scenes. Then we get into literally playing, which means, well, that the guts of the scene itself and what you're doing inside of it. This would essentially be the PC side of the house. This is like your standard TTRPG playing, right? Non-GM stuff. You're literally playing the game. And then finally is the bookkeeping, which basically just refers to the upkeep of your lists, moving the chaos factor at the end of the scene, and then taking any notes or chronicling your adventure, whatever it is that you've got to do to make sure that you're ready to move into the next area. Pages 59 through 120 essentially cover all of the details that we can't really get into here. There's just so many different areas within this. It's very difficult for us to get into the nitty gritty of it. But if you have a copy of the book, there's basically 60 pages there that include different tables, descriptions, tools. These are all things that are going to help you generate your scene. This is huge for your games because if you ever needed help stringing together your ideas into a campaign or to an adventure kit, or even just you got stuck on building what you're building, this is where you're going to allow this tool to really do the work for you. It's huge. Definitely a giant, giant benefit. Starting on page 123, you're going to get some variations within this game system to assist with getting the Mythic system to fit best within your game, right? Like mentioned, this can literally be used with any TTRPG. So it's going to give you some helping hands in order to know what you're going to want to use from the source books on the TTRPG to tables and guidance to determining NPC stats and other areas like that, right? It's a very good read. I'd really recommend some real focus in this area. That's from pages 123 to 185. The whole section starts off, and I really like this quote, the very first paragraph. It says, "The Mythic system is built to be modular and highly customizable. Use the rules you want, ignore the ones you don't, and adjust the ones you've chosen to get the desired tone for your adventures." And I love that concept because it's essentially saying, as I did at the beginning of the podcast, it's giving you free reign to make this work best for your game. And it makes it so incredibly powerful and customizable to allow for any type of game, whether you're playing, a high fantasy, a dark fantasy, a magic, a no magic, a sci-fi game, a wasteland type game, whatever it is that you throw at this. The intention with the tool isn't so that it takes the game over, but instead that it clips on and assists you in actually running the game out. And for people who are unable to get groups together, this is a huge benefit for you because you're going to essentially be able to play these tabletop RPGs that would normally require a table of 4, 5, 6 people, and you're able to do it by yourself. After that section, we've got a rules summary. So basically the condensed version of everything we just went through, kind of like a quick lookup section, but very beneficial and helpful here. That starts on page 186. It summarizes all the rules in a nice area. Then we've got a couple forms that we can fill out on 192 and 193. And then there's the full collection of all the charts and tables. And that goes from pages 194 to 226. And then that's it. That's the whole book. So as I mentioned earlier, the book itself it's meaty. It has a lot of data and information in here, but it's really easy to read through. And then as you're going through, you can actually look and see like, oh, I'm going to use this. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to clip this section out. The Mythic tables are so awesome. I love the idea of that. And the ability that you could, in Tale of the Manticore, he rolls the dice and sometimes it fits the story right now, and other times it's like, well, we'll see where we get to, and then that gives essentially a landmark to drive towards and get the story into a place that now it's going to land and make sense from that point of view. So Very, very cool. Very strong. From an opinions point of view, I personally think this is like this gargantuan tool that can be used in so many different ways. And it's just such a small investment, right? For $15, you essentially amplify your GM output so much that you're basically getting a partner GM or literally getting your own GM for a game to play that's going to assist you with everything. Is it going to replace an in-person GM? No, obviously not, right? But all things considered, this is a huge step in that direction and allows you the ability to essentially run those games out. I can see a huge benefit here of, as a GM, wanting to test out a section of the game for, let's say, role-playing purposes or for other things that aren't combat. And you could use this system to kind of check, gut check your encounters or your adventures to make sure that they're on point with what your party might do, and essentially give you an option to think about things that you otherwise might not have. The artwork throughout the book, it's fantastic. Jorge did a fantastic job. It's got this simple look, but it's also incredibly detailed at the same time. And I mean, honestly, for the cost and what you get out of it, this one's just a no-brainer. I really, really would recommend it. I definitely recommend that you go and take a look at it. Again, I'll put the links in the description below for you. And at that point, this would typically be the time for us to get into the post-pod. Post-pod, 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 post-pod. It's time for the post-pod. Finney's not here to post-pod with me, but I'm going to do the best I can. And the post-pod question of this episode is, where's the best place to start an adventure? And I was really thinking about this because I'm currently working through creating my next D&D adventure for the group that we play through when we stream our games on Sunday night. And I was thinking about, like, how do you start an adventure, right? The stereotypical place to start the adventure is you enter a tavern and the people look at you, right? The rats in the cellar, that's also a kind of stereotypical. I like the idea that there is a collective reason for all the people to be there. My last adventure, I used essentially everybody in the party was mailed a letter that they needed to come and assist in the form of like a mercenaries type of thing. I really like building narrative into that. Starting in a tavern is definitely great. I think that is your kind of default standard way of starting kicking off a D&D adventure. Honestly, as someone who's been playing for a long time, I do appreciate any time that we get to start in a tavern. But I really like the idea of building almost like an initial quest. And something that I'm testing out with this new game is I'm taking a page out of Dungeon Crawl Classics book by using the funnel and essentially the level 0 encounters that you do with the session start in that game. And it's my intention essentially to have this party brought together as a form of that. So that is actually the glue where we start. So the start of the adventure is actually a long form quest that some of the players may or may not survive, essentially, depending on the decisions that they make. That would be my personal recommendation, is to drive some narrative in there, because the beauty by doing it that way is that the players will actually help generate some of the next things to happen over the adventure course that you're about to enter into. It's possible that they open a door that you weren't thinking of and help you create the adventure even better than you had it before. That's it. That's all. A short one this week. I apologize for that, but this is the solo version of the podcast. I definitely don't want to talk your ear off too much when it's just me, but thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this podcast. Whether you chose to download it, stream it, or watch it on YouTube, we really appreciate that. You can find the podcast on all of those standard places, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. The YouTube channel for this is www.youtube.com/@DadGamingOnline. You can also find us streaming our Dungeons & Dragons games live every Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on that same YouTube channel. We also stream it on twitch.tv/DGOnline. You can also send us an email if you want to get in touch with us. That email address is mastersofpenandpaper@gmail.com. And we also have a Discord server. You can find the link in the description below, where we talk about all kinds of cool things in there, but we do have a dedicated little section of that space just for board games and tabletop RPG discussion. That's it for episode 29. Thank you so much for listening to the end here. Episode 30 is coming at you, and I'm going to do my best to get Finney in here with you. So that episode 30 is the next one, and Finney will be with me for that one. So make sure you tune in for that. And other than that, you have yourselves a great one, and we'll see you next time.